heart of America, a land of even tempo, a land of mild traditions, a land that has kept its traditions of horse racing, ballad, song, story, and folk music. It has held steadfast to its pioneer tradition of fighting men, fighting for America and for the soil of Kentucky, that is filled with bluegrass beauty, that is not akin to poetry, but is poetry.
Jesse Stuart is one Kentucky writer who has used his native state, its natural setting, its history, and its folklore in his poetry, novels, short stories, and essays. He is a prolific writer who lives and works in his native hills of eastern Kentucky. As you approach W. Hollow, Stuart's home in Greenup County, you're aware of countless ways of the blending of old and new traditions, the heritage of the past putting its stamp on the present. A man's home is his castle, and more, his home is a reflection of his personality. Stuart's home is built on the soil he tilled as a boy. The original small log house has grown by various additions and modernizations as the man has grown to a large, varied, comfortable, and very literary establishment. And what literary paraphernalia the house cannot accommodate spills over into the smokehouse. Here, perhaps, is the striking living symbol of the present shaped by the heritage of the past. For the smokehouse was once necessary for curing meat on the isolated farm. But now it serves a more pressing need as a part of the literary establishment, and its owner buys his meat at the supermarket. The old blends with the new, our living heritage. Stuart wrote it into his poetry better than we could ever say it for him.
Have any choice as to where I was born, but if I had had my choice, I would have chosen Kentucky. And if I could have chosen when to breathe, I would have chosen the Kentucky wind, with the scent of cedar, pine tree needles, green tobacco leaves, pawpaw, persimmon, and sassafras. I would have chosen, too, wind from the sawbriar and the greenbrier blossoms.
If I could have chosen the spot in Kentucky, I would have chosen W. Hollow, the place where I was born, where 4 generations of my people have lived, and where they still live. Here, too, I have always lived where the hills form a semicircle barrier against roads, and there is only one way to get out. This way is to follow the stream. Here I first saw Kentucky light. Here I first breathed Kentucky air, and here I grew from childhood to manhood. Before I had been away to see what lay beyond the rim of hills that closed my world, I followed the little streams that flowed over rocks between the high hills to the river, and then somewhere into the unknown world. I hunted the wild game in the hunting seasons, skillful as an Indian, and I ran wild over the rock-ribbed hills, enjoying this land of lonesome waters, sunlight, tobacco, pine, pawpaw, persimmon, sawbriar, greenbrier, and sassafras. I enjoyed the 4 seasons, sections of time my father used to divide his work for the year, as much as any boy in America ever enjoyed them. When winter began to break, snow melted down the little channels on the high hills. Spring was in the wind. I could feel it. I could taste it. I could see it, and it was beautiful to me. Then came the sawbriar and the greenbrier leaves and the trailing arbutus on the rock-ribbed hills. Next came the snow-white blossoms of percoon in the coves. Then came the canvas-topped tobacco beds, white strips of fortune on each high hill slope. Then came the dogwood and the wild crabapple blossoms, white sails in the soft, honey-colored wind of morning. And the red sails of the flowering redbud, stationary fire hanging in the soft, mellow wind of evening against the sunset. The weeping willow, stream willow, and pussy willow loosed their long fronds to finger the bright wind tenderly. Then came soft avalanches of green beech tops.
In the deep hollows that hid the mayapple, yellowroot, ginseng, wild sweet williams, baby tear, and phlox, when I learned Kentucky springs could not go on forever, I was sick of heart.
Year of My Rebirth is autobiographical, a journal of Stuart's long convalescence from a near-fatal illness. Here he reflects on matters of life and death in the most intimate way and bears witness to the restorative powers of nature. Even though the book is personal and reflective, the traditions of the people of Kentucky, their language, handicrafts, and pastimes appear repeatedly in this unique journal.
Well, Jesse, I figure there's not much use in going to the nursery in Ashland today and getting them strawberry plants. Unless you got a cool, dry place to keep them in.
Why do you say that, Glenn?
Well, now, have you looked up and down the creek banks this morning? On the bottoms and the bluffs and the flats and everywhere? Yeah. Now look over there, won't you?
Spider webs, everywhere.
That's it. That's what I'm talking about.
Now, what does spider webs have to do with setting strawberry plants?
It's going to be a long, dry spell. Never seen it fail.
Look at that overcast. It'll be raining before this afternoon.
No, it won't. No, it won't rain. Spiders know. Spiders always right. You'll see.
Weather signs are one aspect of folklore. Salad greens in the spring are another.
Today, Naomi went into the backyard, where we have not mown the grass, to pick greens. She took a basket and a knife. She ignored the flowers, the baby tears, and cinquefoil and violets that grow there in plenty. This morning, she went out for food, and she brought back a delightful noon meal. This is what she picked. She picked willy britches, which Mom and Dad used to call white top, though she didn't find too many of them growing. Then, near the Shingle Mill hollow stream, she found narrow dock, a slick green leaf and very different in taste from sourdock. Of course, she couldn't leave the early and tender plantain out, and Johnny Jump Up she picked to add flavor to our first mess of greens. Naomi found peppergrass near the second walnut tree, then the wild beet, a grass with a round, smooth leaf. She picked sweet Annie from the yard for its very sweet taste. Near the chicken house, she picked the soft, tender, juicy young poke and added it to the variety in her basket. Then she found some pig ear, which grows very sparsely here, and finally some of the rare, ruffled lettuce and much more of the slick and common lettuce. The greens Naomi picked today are very common varieties. As long as you know your greens well enough to tell what is edible from what is poisonous, you can even put a few alfalfa, sassafras, and slippery elm leaves into the hodgepodge. It is exactly what the name implies. Everything that grows in the early spring that is good to eat, cooked together in a big pot.
Rural families have done without some of the conveniences and comforts enjoyed by their city cousins, but it was a poor family indeed who could not set an appetizing meal before company on short notice. In Beyond Dark Hill, Stuart recalls his own ravenous appetite when he returned home from a semester in college. Here is the menu for a Christmas dinner. spare ribs, ham, gravy, sweet milk and buttermilk, roasted goose, chicken, blackberries, strawberries, cherries, apples, huckleberry preserves, wild grapes, jelly, honey, biscuits and cornbread, pickled beans, pickled corn and kraut, pie, cake, and quail meat extra. The title of Stuart's best-selling and best-known work, The Thread That Runs So True, derives from observations of school children at play. Their old singing game is sometimes a means of choosing up sides for a contest, sometimes a kissing game. Big Andy was the biggest boy in school, and when we played fox and dog, Big Andy was always the fox. He could outrun the rest of us over the big meadows on the uplands, through the woods and down the hollows. Ask any folklorist, and he'll tell you that the most accessible and authentic examples of folklore are usually found among children at play. Here we often find the strange mingling of old and new, and in this very mingling, a reflection of a culture. As one might expect in a community where fox hunting is cherished, the children will reflect the pastime at play. These games and songs are now forgotten in many of our communities, but in parts of the hill country of Kentucky, these and other mild traditions have lingered on to be captured and transformed into living literature by an observation of a native writer.
For summer followed with work on the high hills. I plowed the earth on steep slopes and hoed corn, tobacco, cane beside my strong mother with a bright, worn gooseneck hoe. Summer brought good earthy smells of tobacco, cane and corn and ferny loam and growing roots. Summer brought berries, true, that grew wild in the creviced rocks, on the loamy coves and in the deep valleys. Here grew the wild blackberries, strawberries, raspberries, and dewberries. All I had to do was take my bucket and pick them. Then came the autumn with hazelnuts ripening on the pasture bluffs, along the cattle paths and sheep trails. The black walnuts, white walnuts, hickory nuts, beech nuts fell from the trees in little heaps, and the canopy of leaves turned many colors after the first sharp frost had fallen, and the soft summer wind turned cool and brittle, and the little insect sounds of summer became a lost murmur like the dwindling streams. Autumn brought sweet smells of the wild possum grapes, and the mountain tea berries, and the blood-red sassafras and persimmon leaf. Autumn brought the mellow taste of the persimmon, that after frost did not pucker my mouth with summer bitterness. October pawpaws with purple-colored skins I found in heaps beneath the trees when I went after cows. I opened them to find the cornmeal mush softness, yellow gold in color, and better than bananas to taste.
They went into the brain, body, flesh, and blood. These things, Kentucky flavored, growing in her dirt, helped build my body strong and shape my brain. They laid foundations for my future thoughts. They made me a part of Kentucky.
They made me a part of Kentucky. They made Kentucky a part of me. These are the inescapable things. Childhood to boyhood to manhood. Even the drab hills of winter were filled with music. The lonesome streams and the narrow-gauged valleys sang poetic songs without words. And the leafless trees, etched on gray winter skies, were strong and substantial lines of poetry.
First comes the land, and with the teeming life and change of seasons. But there are people on the land, people laughing and crying according to their traditional way of life.
If a writer grows up surrounded by the folklore of his people, he must reflect it as truly as he reflects the visible natural world.
Young folks like to have a little fun. We old folks like to watch you. It'll remind us of the days gone by. The cane is cut and in a stack at the mill. We are ready to make sorghum and to frolic. The Barney mule is hitched to a long sweep. He walks steadily around a circular path that is covered with ground cane stalks. Stuart faithfully chronicles the traditional work, followed by traditional play. Closest to Stuart's own calling as a writer is the oral tradition of telling tales. Some of Stuart's stories are only a step or two removed from the stream of oral tradition.
What do you say, brother Tom Hugo?
It's going to tell the big old yarn today?
I guess so. How was that snake story you used to tell about the hoop snake? I've heard it's been some time ago.
Well, you know, we had several different kind of snakes in my neighborhood, but we had one that was kind of odd.
You want to put up?
It would pour up in a round ball, more like a hook. When you get ready to strike, and it had about a 2-inch horn on top of his head, and he'd roll right towards you when it aims to strike. So one day I was...
I've heard about that, but do you really believe?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Well, one day I was hoeing tobacco on a hillside, and I heard a racket. I looked up, and this snake was coming right towards me, and it's getting mighty close. And I didn't have time to do very much, only to jump out of the way.
Really?
And I stuck my hoe handle out where I was standing, and he hit that hoe handle center. And he stuck that horn in that hoe handle, and every year about that time, that hoe handle would swell up.
That makes me think of a story Granny Blue used to tell me when I was a small kid. she'd have me in tears and scare me to death. Said that there was a family supposedly lived close to her. Of course, I thought they did. And this husband, he was a drunk. No good kind of a guy, wouldn't provide for his family. And this was a good woman, and she stood it just about as long as she could. And she killed the last hen they had and made dumplings to fill the kids up. Set them all down at the table, and she went upstairs and was gone longer than they thought she should have been. And the oldest one went up to investigate and see what the trouble was. And she had tied a sheet around her neck, one end of it, and the other around a bedpost, and jumped out of a window.
Kill her?
Yeah, hanged herself. Yeah. So they had to break up. The grandparents took the children to live with them, and that old drunk, he just beat it around over the country. But
Was he drinking moonshine?
yeah, anything he'd get a hold of. But nobody never could live in this house after that. They said that they'd see this woman there in the nighttime prowling around.
Mm-hmm.
And they would hear strange noises of the night. Said it'd sound like all the dishes tumbling out of the cupboard, crashing onto the floor. And some said in passing there with the night, in ghost time, you know, that, they had seen a monstrous wolf-like dog on the roof, even trying to tear the boards off. So that ends Granny Blue's ghost story.
Do you believe in them things?
No, don't say that I do. But there's a little rabbit in all of us, I guess.
I tell you, I never did believe in them very much, but my father bought a farm down on the river, and on this farm now, there was 8 or 10 tenant houses.
Yeah, I remember them old houses.
And one of them, I noticed that nobody never lived in. So I asked him one day, I said, Father, why is it that nobody never lived in that certain house? He says, well, you know, it's over right close to that graveyard, and they say it's haunted. Well, it went on a year or two, and I got a little older.
You say you believe in angels?
Oh, yeah. I decided I'd go over and see it. Well, I went over there, I guess about half an hour of sun, had me a lamp, and went in this house and looked it over good before dark. Well, wasn't nothing there, nothing but a few old boxes. Well, I got one of these old boxes and went out on the porch and sat down. After a while, it began to get dark. And I got up and went in and lit my lamp. Went back out on the porch and sat down. After it got good and dark, why, this light went out. Well, I just thought maybe it was kind of a current gas coming through the house and blowed it out, and I went back in there and lit it. Went back on the porch, sat down, hadn't been sitting there over 5 minutes, I don't guess. Went out again.
You didn't go back and light it a third time?
Well, I said, I'm going back and light you one more time. And if you go out, why, I'm gone. So I started back in there, and there stood a fellow in the door.
Wow.
Red big man. Says, we're by ourselves tonight, ain't we? I said, yeah, but not for long. I jumped off that porch and struck out home. Well, I was on, I guess, half a mile, and I just got out of breath. Thought I'd sit down and rest a few minutes. I was sitting there painting, looked around, that guy sitting right beside of me. Yeah, he said we had a pretty good race, didn't we? I said, yes, and we're going to have another. So I started, and I tore up so much dust in that road that he couldn't keep up with me. So I beat it home.
I was thinking of your snake story a while ago. I heard one where a fella, this back since auto's been around, he run up on a big rattler, and it's almost unbelievable. Said that he run the front wheel up on it and got out and got a piece of a fence rail and killed it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the rounds, why, a snake evidently bit this front tire. Said the next morning it had swelled up and busted.
Is that right? Well,
There is a touch of nostalgia here and there for the good old days and ways, but Stuart is a realist. He depicts the heritage of Kentucky as one man sees it. His depiction is an intimate one, based on close observation and participation. He has a well sweep, but he draws his water from a faucet. He has a smokehouse, but he uses it for an extension of his study. Though he chronicles the heritage of Kentucky faithfully as he sees it, nowhere does Stuart include the sentimental mockery or sensational quaintness. The artist's view of his native state is spelled out.
Then I was as positive as death. Kentucky was not east, west, south, or north, but it was the heart of America, pulsing with a little bit of everything. The heart of America, a land of even tempo, a land of mild traditions, a land that has kept its traditions.